I'd like to thank you for asking me to do this. It's been a great opportunity. And before I begin, I would like to thank all of the veterans who are, I'm not sure how many we have with us today, but who have served our country, and in my instance, who have actually served in Canada. So if you could put on, read the pictures of the first one, the first photo. This first picture is my Uncle Jim, as I was talking about earlier. And this is a dedication that is on the Squamish Nation on the Mission Reserve, right next to the Catholic Church. And so I know there were other veterans involved in putting together the memorial, but I know my Uncle Jim was one of the key, people who organized it. I'll talk a little bit more about him shortly. And the next video is, it actually is a picture of Tom with Elder Andy Natrell. Elder Natrell is presenting Tom with a blanket, which is one of the traditions of Native peoples to honor someone. And so Elder Natrell served in World War I as a, is the next one? I'm not sure what the next one. Oh, Tom. But I just wanted to say that from what I saw, that there were 3 veterans from World War I on that memorial. So this is my brother, Thomas N. Elmowella, who you're going to be hearing a lot about. But before I introduce him, I want to properly ground myself and properly introduce myself. This is our way of introducing ourselves. My name is Colleen Elizabeth Elmowella. My ancestral name is Kamatlut. I'm the daughter of Thomas Corpus Elmowella and Dorothy Nahaney Elmowella. I'm the granddaughter of Edward and Margaret Lackett Joe Nahaney, granddaughter of Benito and Theodora Corpus Elmowella. I'm mother of Anthony and Justin Neal, and grandmother to Dylan Neal. I'm an Indepina. I'm of Squamish and Filipino heritage. Currently, I'm on the faculty of Northwest Indian College, and I'm on the Fort Campbell site where I teach and advise in the Native Studies Leadership Program. Many years ago, I probably could have retired, but the work is so important to me that I continue to do it, and they're probably going to have to boot me out the door in order to get me to stop. But so today I'm here to talk about what it means to grow up with hometown hero Thomas Nahaney Elmowella, whose ancestral name is Saitha Sultan. He is one of, and we have 3 other siblings, and I'll talk a little bit about them in a minute. But being his sister is an interesting challenge, especially I'm glad that I have a focus here and that I'm talking about his military career, because that is definitely, kind of a single focus, because you could go in many directions. You could talk about his golfing. You could talk about, his ability to storytell. He's an interesting hometown hero. But so, Katie, should I just go ahead with it, or?
Yeah, we want to hear.
Okay. All right.
So why don't you start, if we can start just with the early history of the family, just to give us a grounding there.
Okay, especially to the people on Bainbridge.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dad, Thomas Corpus Elmowella,
So, yeah.
came to Bainbridge Island in the 1930s from Bacnotan La Union, island of Luzon, Philippines. He came to join his younger brother, Uncle Garcia, or Garciano, and numerous other male relatives who were working as laborers in the strawberry fields on Bainbridge. And most of those strawberry fields, or maybe all of those strawberry fields, were then owned by Japanese farmers. But in the 1940s, during World War II, when the Japanese community was forced off of Bainbridge Island into internment camps throughout the Western United States, Dad helped maintain one of those farms, and I believe the farm that he took over was the farm owned by Mr. Furukawa. And that farm is located on what is now Highway 305 and Day Road. So it was south of there, just to give the Bainbridge Island people some kind of bearings in terms of where that field was. But this was long before Highway 305 went through Bainbridge Island. And then Mom, Dorothy Nahaney Elmowella, she used to love to tell their story. In fact, there are videos, one video put out by Dencho. I think you can still get it online. Mm-hmm. But she came down in 1942, and Mom decided to join our great-grandmother, Agnes Lackett Joe, and this is our ta'a. Ta'a is our word for grandmother, and numerous other relatives to pick strawberries. And the field, so she said that when she got off the ferry and on Bainbridge, there were large trucks of Filipino and Japanese farmers there to meet the indigenous people who had come to the island to pick their berries. And then Mom always said she spotted Dad first thing. She thought he was handsome, so she convinced her family to climb aboard his truck. So that's how they met. So the long story short is Mom and Dad actually married that summer, as did numerous other Native women and Filipino men. In fact, I'd like to plug a film that is currently in production, and that's being put out by Bainbridge's Indopino community, and that film is called Honor Thy Mother. And this film tells the story of those unions. So we're working really hard on that. The pandemic has kind of slowed down, production a bit, but we're doing the best we can. Mm-hmm. So eventually, though, Mom and Dad acquired 10 acres of land on Day Road. And if I remember correctly, for 10 acres on Bainbridge Island, beautiful property. Dad paid like $1,000 for it. So as we can tell, you can't even begin to buy an inch of property on Bainbridge now for that. But so that's where they began their own strawberry field. So our early history as children, after marriage in 1942, the April of the following year, Thomas Nahaney Elmowella, the firstborn, and he's the tallest one in this picture. He was born and weighed He weighed more than 9 pounds. And I understand that he was a precocious child, walking by 9 months and potty training himself. So, but 11 months later, he was joined by me, Colleen, and then 13 months after that was born Brother Ed. And I know I saw that Brother Ed is on here somewhere too. So mathematically, within 24 months, Mom had 3 young children. Because their next family is was, first of all, Brother Benito. Ben was born, I believe, 10 years after Brother Tom, and Sister Denise 4 years after that. So they were like the privileged family that followed. Denise laughed, Denise. Anyway, so childhood was playing outside, creating our own games, and we were free until we were old enough to join the workers in the berry fields. And once that started, playtime was cut short dramatically. And I think that that's the first thing I talk about is the amount of, it was not a privilege to work in the fields. We were required to work in the fields. And so childhood, I'd like to read then, I think our experience then where life changes is when we entered public school. So I'm talking about these things because I think that there were challenges that we all experienced, and I don't know as siblings whether we really talked about it or not, but where I picked this up was there's a publication distributed by the Bainbridge Island School District called They Cast a Long Shadow. And in that book, the following story shapes Tom and our child development. And I think it's important to talk about it, but because it also talks about our determination in terms of development. So.
And this was published in 75, I think.
Right. Yeah, it was early on, but I understand. Yeah. Well, there is a current revision of the publication because the teachers would still like to use it in the schools. So these are in Tom's
These
words.
are the quotes, yeah.
Tom says, in my pre-grade school days, all family or social relations came among people of our own kind. There were white people and brown people on the island. White people didn't mix with us, vice versa. The only white guy I remember early in life was a guy who ran the strawberry cannery, and all he wanted was our berries. Then there was school. That was a shocker. I don't know whether in kindergarten or first grade, but a group of white kids were kidding me about the color of my skin. I still remember to this day the nickname Brownie, and even one kid asking me why my skin was so black. I guess being poor also had a great deal to do with my feeling of lowness. I remember feelings when the words brown and poor were used. At times I would feel like crying, and other times I wanted to punch out every white kid I saw. But after a while, I began to realize that I could be just as good as any white could ever be, whether I had money or not. I had to develop self-confidence and get off my rear. Kind of a side note, my own experience is similar to this, having different challenges, especially in those early elementary years. But this is a story about Tom, not me. Mom and Dad made sure we made education and church a priority. Having to attend Catholic catechism every Saturday and church on Sundays Grade school was important in that A's and B's were praised. If we brought home C's, that often meant a scolding from dad. So that's how important education was to mom and dad. In the early years, we didn't have electricity or running water, and studied at the kitchen table with kerosene lamps as our only lighting. School then became the center of our social life. Our parents weren't active members of the Filipino community. Outside of taking crates of berries to the strawberry receiving shed, which is now next to the Bainbridge Island Filipino Hall on High School Road. And from there, they shipped the berries to different canneries in, I don't know, Western Washington. Recently, Tom talked about his days in the berry fields. And he said, I do remember my best year picking berries. I made $110.
That's a lot.
Usually the money we made picking was used to buy school clothes for the next year. One year, Ed and I bought bikes, so there wasn't much left for school clothes. I remember a lot of socks with holes, he says. But recently, Tom talked about his days in the berry fields. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as a side note, I wanted to buy a bike too, but Dad said girls shouldn't ride bikes. So that tells you another something else that I had to deal with. But that, again, this is not my story. This is Tom's story. But in high school, Tom played, like he said, he had to develop and get off his rear. And these are some of the examples of what he did. So he played in all the major sports: basketball, football, baseball, and track, and lettering in all those sports. The sport Tom is best remembered for are his abilities on the basketball court. He won all league and all state awards for his abilities. Academically, Tom earned a gold cord in the Honor Society, meaning he attained at least a 3.0 or a 3.5, demonstrated leadership and good character, providing services to Bainbridge High School and the community for all 4 years that he was in high school. And Tom was also student body vice president during his junior year. He probably was on the homecoming court, but I couldn't find that when he was a senior. So in other words, high school was a time of high achievement, high recognition. But during these years, berry picking days did not stop. Eventually, Dad went to work full-time in the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard because strawberries were no longer lucrative. The cost went up so much that Dad decided to do something else. And at that time, he gave Tom and Ed some land to plant their own berries to farm. And Tom says, during the first year, we bit off more than we could chew and couldn't keep up with the picking. We had to cut down on the number of rows we could handle during the second year. Tom goes on to say, people don't realize that berry farming is an all-year effort and the weeding never ends. Summers were hard work and summer vacation was just a name. Another side note, and to sell their berries, they put me out in a little stand and I got to sell their berries. So after graduation is when Tom started thinking about his future. And just a couple of months ago, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, he left. And so we had an opportunity to talk about this project. Excuse me.
Yeah, I was wondering, you know, how did the military factor in and how did he get interested?
Right, okay. So so when Tom and I were talking, Tom said my recollection of anything about Army were, first of all, Dad's pictures. And this is a picture of one picture of Dad when he was in the Army, although I never spoke to him of his experience. Even though Dad loved the Army, he only served 1 year, or maybe just a little longer than that. And what we understand is he got an honorable hardship discharge. It may have been called something else because of his family situation of one, you know, we were poor and, you know, he had 3 young babies, you know, at home under the age of what? I think he went into the Army in, I think Ed, I won't go into that, but we were all in diapers. There's a story behind that too. In addition to Dad's time in the military, we had 2 uncles who served in the military during World War II.
So there was a lot of respect there. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of respect from seeing those role models.
Right, yeah, exactly. They had influence in all of our lives. First of all was Uncle Jim Patrick Nahaney. Now he's the one, if I could, I wish I had a pointer, but he's the one right in the middle of this picture. He was the first one to join during World War II, but he joined the Canadian Army and going into battle in Europe. He was followed by our uncle Edward Nahaney, but because Uncle Eddie had asthma, he was not eligible to go into the Canadian Army. So he came down to the United States and joined the U.S. Army. But after enlistment, he too was sent to Europe. Unfortunately, Uncle Ed was killed in one of the major Allied forces battles. And I couldn't remember if it was the Battle of the Bulge or exactly which one, but it was one of those major battles. But his body, so that would be in the mid-40s, but his body actually wasn't returned to Canada, and it was returned back to Squamish Nation in Canada. And so I think it was probably about 1949, because I was really thinking about how old we were. And we had an opportunity to go to the Squamish Nation as a family to attend the military funeral. And what I remember most about it was the emotional experiences of that. It was pretty traumatic for Mom as well as everyone else for that to happen. And then Tom's next memory was after the Korean War was over. So having to dress up as a family and go to Seattle to see a military parade. In the military parade were the soldiers returning from the Korean War. And he continues, I remember the soldiers looked so tall, their uniforms so crisp and neat, and they wore bright, shiny boots. And everybody was so proud. And it left a lasting impression on me at around 10 years old. So Tom went on to say, the impact of the death of Uncle Eddie and seeing the return of the soldiers from Korea brought home the tremendous sacrifice that men and women in uniform are willing to make for their country. Our uncle's death made that point very personal to me. I thought Tom's next story was somewhat humorous until I realized he was serious. I had asked him, "Why did you decide to go into the military?" He said, in Mr. Denny's 7th grade class, we had to make a report on what we wanted to do when we grew up. I told him I wanted to be a jockey. There's a whole story around that too, but not for this time. He told me I was too big and to get another field. So he said, "I'd like to read the comics in the newspaper," and happened to be reading the comic strip on Beetle Bailey. Some of you may or may not know who Beetle Bailey is.
Raise your hand if you do.
I decided to use pictures from the comic strip, Tom said, and do a small report on the Army. Little did I know then that it would be my life's profession. And then he went on to say, also in my early teens, when we finally got electricity and got a television, it really opened up the world to me. There was a weekly show called Men of West Point, which really impressed me. I remember asking Mom if she thought I could go to school there, and she told me that it was just for rich kids. I never thought about it again. Then in my junior year, all the students had to have a meeting with Mr. Hellner, a high school guidance counselor. He asked me if I was thinking about going on to college. I told him I would like to, but didn't have any money, and we would need to work a couple of years to earn enough money. He told me with my grades and athletic experience that I thought about going to military academies. I told him I had dreamed about going to West Point, but that it was impossible. He explained the process to gain admission. It was difficult and a complex process, but I thought I'd give it a try. After completing this process, I was declared fully qualified for admittance, but I was not selected, and I was extremely disappointed. So Tom goes on to say, so what did you decide to do? So after graduation, I was in limbo. Dad got me into the apprenticeship program at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard as a pipe fitter. And mind you, this is in the early 60s. And that summer I was making a whopping $2.25 an hour. And Tom says I was in heaven. And $2.25 in the early 60s was a lot of money. During this time, Tom applied for an academic scholarship at Olympic College in Bremerton and won the scholarship and began school in the fall, and here majored in engineering. But at Olympic College, but when he was at Olympic College, he made the basketball team, playing for them that year. But in the spring, Tom decided to give West Point another try. Tom says, I did the whole process again, but didn't think my chances were good. On my birthday in April of 1962, I received a letter that I had been selected for admission to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. I remember that. I remember before Tom came home from school, Mom opened the letter. And of course, I was right there. We were all really curious. I remember she cried. And I don't think she was because she was happy, as much it was that Tom would be moving so far away from home. Because I still remember him sitting, and then I remember him sitting on the bed, opening his acceptance letter. And it was fun to watch him. You know, there are tapes in your head of things you remember from the past. And that was one of the ones that I remember. So Tom was the first Bainbridge High School graduate to win appointment to West Point. And he entered the academy on July 2nd of 1962. They also did some other research and to find out how many Native Americans had been accepted to West Point. And I think it was less than 5. And so Tom was one of few. But this appointment changed the trajectory of his life. So I guess what I could do next is just talk briefly about his military career after being accepted at West Point. Sound good?
Yeah, just briefly about his career. That would be great because we're honoring him today.
Because he's a veteran.
We're at 10 minutes after 12. So if you want to leave some time for people, I just wanted to let you know that. But
okay, I think we're good.
Carry on. Yes, we're doing great.
Yeah. So Tom left for West Point in the fall of, maybe it was the end of the summer of 1962. I remember how it was an all-family trip, going to the airport to see him off. Not only did it include us, his immediate family, but it also included our entire extended family. We all went along, uncles and aunties and cousins. So it was a big thing. It was a big thing for our communities. And so everybody went on that journey to the airport. And the next piece is Tom's, or in Tom's words. And so he said, when I asked him, what was that like? He said, I'm not sure I should go into any depth about West Point, my West Point experience, other than to say that the mission of West Point is to develop officers to lead our Army and fight our wars. As an educational institution, I think it is the finest in the world and as tough as any in the world. Classes and tests were 6 days a week. You flunk one class and you're gone. You're up at 6 and rarely in bed before 1 a.m. You are on the go all your waking hours. Thoughts of quitting seemed to fill my whole first year, but the thought of facing the people back home drove me to keep going. Many days I thought I'd never make it.
That's a wonderful quote.
I remember how much I miss Tom, my own personal story. As a family, none of us had ever spent time away from home, literally. So it was an adjustment for all of us. And Tom wasn't allowed to come back home until after his first year. I guess the fear was if the cadets go home, they'd never, return. So this is a picture of Tom. He's in the front row. This is his, I think it's called the squadron. I asked him and he told me and I've forgotten, but because I thought it was platoon and that's way too big. But anyway, so this is a group that he started West Point. I also want to say to my family members that are online that I took some liberty in terms of some of the pictures because I didn't have the exact pictures I wanted. So anyway, they understand what I mean. So anyway, Tom says, my 2 greatest accomplishments from West Point were 1, winning the appointment to attend West Point, and 2, graduating from West Point with the class of 1966. I would also add that upon graduation, he was commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the U.S. Army. So that's all he shared with me in terms of his West Point years. But it sounded pretty grueling, and that's the way, that's the way it was every time that someone got an opportunity to talk to him. Mom and my little sister Denise got to go to attend Tom's graduation. So they got to go all the way to West Point. And I remember how upset I was that I didn't get to go. Remember, I used to watch a television program, The Men of West Point, too. Anyway, it was, so it was, I can remember how Mom had to prepare her clothes for that. She too came off the strawberry field, and she had to have hats and gloves and formal wear and casual wear. But, it's like, it was a lot in terms of cultural adaptation, if you will, to be able to attend such a formal gathering as West Point graduation, and all the, I would assume, banquets, etc. It's not something that we were accustomed to. So after graduation, Tom actually gave me a list, a sort of a timeline of his tours of duty. And I think it's important to go over that because it shows his experience after West Point. I mean, West Point, like I said earlier, it was the trajectory that led him on to this huge career, successful career that, he's proud of it. And we're just as proud of, what he has done, especially given our home experiences, who we were, growing up in poverty, growing up in the berry fields. But all that hard work and all of that led to, determination as a family, as siblings. And, it's been a driving force, even though we've gone in different directions. So, like I said, Tom graduated in 1966, and he went on to Army Airborne School as a parachutist. And then he went to Fort Benning, Georgia, where he went to the Army Ranger School. And from there, he went on to Freiburg, Germany, to 67 and 68. He was at 3rd Armored Division in Germany. So there's one other picture. It just shows how cold it, yeah. He said it was so cold. We had a conversation about this. It was so cold there, and one of the things about Tom that's so remarkable and I love is he's such a storyteller, and he was telling stories about his experience in Germany, but most of all because it was so cold. And in 1962, he went on to the U.S. Army Aviation School to become a helicopter pilot at Fort Walters, Texas. He was assigned to the 1st, and then from there, after going to helicopter school, he was assigned to the 1st Air Cavalry Division in the Republic of South Vietnam. So, and I'd like to talk about his Vietnam tour a little bit. After a tour of duty in Germany, Tom returned to the U.S. and took helicopter training, as I just said, where he received another promotion and was sent to Vietnam. I didn't get a list of when he was, the word commissioned or, got those different promotions. He was one of only a half dozen men to serve with distinction as a combat infantry officer and a Cobra gunship pilot. So this is a picture of Tom in his cowboy hat beside his helicopter. The next one I got off of the internet, but it's probably not what his gunship looked like, but I'm sure it looked a lot like that. But whether it had the shark teeth or not, I'm not sure. But there was a story that came about one of his incredible missions, and I got this story from a publication that was put out by United American Indian Business Association in California that gave out the J. Silverheels Award, which was an award that Tom was awarded. And this was written and read during Tom's introduction. On a bombing mission in Vietnam, Tom's commander was shot down. While trying to render aid, his own gunship was disabled, Tom's gunship. Tom made an emergency landing under heavy enemy fire, and he patched a 3-inch hole in his rotor blade with masking tape, got his helicopter back into the air, and resumed his rocket assault on the enemy stronghold until his ammunition was spent. Back at his base, mechanics shook their head in disbelief. The reality was that Tom's helicopter, they declared, was unflyable. But after that mission, and exactly, I don't know the timeline of this, but Tom listed the awards that he got during and after the Vietnam War. He got the Silver Star, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 2 Bronze Stars with V Device for Valor, 23 awards of the Air Medal, Army Commendation Medal with V Device for Valor, Meritorious Service Award, Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry with Tom. Now, after his tour of combat, Tom became a graduate student at Stanford University. So from the battlegrounds of Vietnam, he goes on to Stanford. So he completed a Master of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of Tom at Stanford, but I do have a family picture somewhere that shows his transition to very short hair to long hair and a beaded headband. So he had to look the part, I guess, of a graduate student at Stanford. He no longer looked like an Army officer. And in 1973 to 1978, he went to, and this is just a picture I found online, NASA Ames Research Center in Sunnyvale, California, where he was an engineer and a helicopter research pilot. In 1979, he was assigned to the 2nd Infantry Division, Republic of Korea. After, knowing his history, thinking about how soldiers coming back from the Korean War and then he's assigned to Korea, there was something ironic, or I don't know if that's quite the right word, but I was thinking about that. But in 1980 to 1983, Tom was again assigned to Santa Clara University. So I think this is a picture of him getting awards, but the next picture. So this is when Tom was at Santa Clara. And at Santa Clara, he headed the Army ROCT department. So he looks relaxed and looks like he enjoyed that position. And then in 1984 and 1987, he was again assigned to Army Advanced Systems Office, NASA, Ames Research Center, Moffett Field. And I know that he wanted to be an astronaut, and he was disappointed. He doesn't talk a lot about disappointments, but I know that it was a disappointment that he wasn't able to go into space, but it was one of his dreams. So from Ames, Tom was selected, and so this is when his whole Army career transitioned, as I see it. Tom was selected to go into the Army Defense Attaché system. So the Army selects a highly qualified regular Army personnel for these assignments within the Defense Attaché system. So in 1988, Tom was assigned to the Army and Air Attaché as the Army and Air Attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Montevideo, Uruguay, South America. So, and then in 1991, he went on to become the Army Attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Santiago, Chile. And he, in 1993, in June of 1993, Tom retired at the rank of colonel in Santiago, Chile, at the age of 50. So what did he decide to do? So in his retirement years, Tom decided not to come home to Bainbridge Island, but to stay in Santiago, where he still lives today. And in November of 1993, Tom married Lorena del Carmen Pizarro Urrutia. Hope I pronounced that correct. He currently lives in Santiago. We're happy that they often get to visit, and we were able, as a family, our siblings got to go down to Santiago to go to their wedding. I should have included a picture of that, but I didn't. They have 2 children, Mariella in the middle and Tommy on the left. Mariella teaches at Redland Private School. She teaches English language acquisition and literature for middle and high school students in Santiago. Tommy is a 2020 graduate of Seattle University, where he majored in mechanical engineering and is currently an Army ROTC recruiter at Seattle University. So can you see history repeating itself? Kind of a side story about all of that is Brother Tom was able to commission Tommy as a 2nd lieutenant in the U.S. Army. And because of the pandemic, he did all of this via Zoom. So that was pretty incredible. We all got to witness it. So that's the story. I am proud to say I am Tom's sister, and I will gladly tell you what he's doing. But remember, I am also Ed, Ben, and Denise's sister. So this is all of us, siblings together, and taken a couple summers ago. So
Thank you.
that's it.